Very good, because the point is this isn't reasserting the Monroe Doctrine. It is completely distorting the Monroe Doctrine, which has changed repeatedly over history. The original Monroe Doctrine was aimed at stopping European colonialism in the Americas, but now it is taken as a license for U.S. hegemony and brazen bullying in the Americas. So when Trump claims a corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, he's not really talking about the Monroe Doctrine. He's talking about a Trumpian version that is completely different from the original. The Monroe Doctrine was enunciated in 1823. It was the seventh message of President James Monroe to the Congress. And this is just one part of the message. But the Monroe Doctrine was an excerpt that had three principles to it. This was in the early 1820s, after the Latin American countries had gained their independence after the Napoleonic Wars. So they had rebelled against the European empires, and there were now independent nations in Central and South America. And the United States said first that the age of European colonialism in the Americas is at an end. That didn't mean the end of European colonies. Some of them have lasted until today, after all, in the Caribbean, for example, or indeed in South America. But the point is that there would be no new colonies. The second was that Europe should not intervene in the affairs of the Americas. So it was a non-intervention idea, not only the end of colonialism, but the end of European meddling. Remember, this was the age of high European imperialism. And the United States, a new and relatively weak country at the time, was asserting that European empires should not meddle in the internal affairs of European the newly independent countries, independent from Europe. There was a third clause, almost never mentioned, very important, which said, by the way, the United States will not meddle in Europe's affairs. So from the beginning, the Monroe Doctrine was a doctrine of reciprocity. This is hardly ever mentioned. The United States from the beginning said, you don't bother us, we won't bother you. Now, this has never been actually applied, at least since the United States became a great power internationally in the 20th century. The doctrine has been applied, you don't bother us, and we'll bother you as we see fit. Thank you very much. So the reciprocity part was very important in 1823, but then abandoned. But you can see that in 1823, the Monroe Doctrine was not a doctrine claiming the U.S. prerogatives in the Americas, the U.S. right to intervene, or any such thing. It was a message to Europe: stop your colonialism, stop interfering in the internal affairs of the Americas, and we, the United States, will not interfere in the internal affairs of Europe. During the 19th century, the Monroe Doctrine was invoked a number of times. For example, when Napoleon III attempted to install an emperor in Mexico, and the United States said, no, European imperial powers cannot meddle in the Americas. Starting at the end of the 19th century, the U.S. had completed its conquest of North America, which was the main imperialist expansion of the United States in the 19th century, continental. But once the continent was under U.S. control, then U.S. actions internationally became the imperial intent. So already in the mid-1890s, President Grover Cleveland invoked the Monroe Doctrine to stop Britain from forcing a territorial adjustment between Venezuela and British Guyana. Okay, this was an example of the United States asserting more claims that we're going to decide these issues, and not European powers. Britain was the main power of the world, after all, in 1895. But then in 1905, our real imperialist president, Theodore Roosevelt, made a corollary. And this is very, very important. It also has a background, but the Roosevelt corollary, actually 1904, stated that the U.S. asserted its police functions in the Western Hemisphere. The U.S. was there to keep order in the Western Hemisphere. So this was very different from the doctrine of 80 years previously. This was not only a doctrine now addressed to Europe, it was an assertion of American power in the Americas, that the U.S. would be the policeman for the Americas. It has an interesting origin, actually, which is that Venezuela defaulted on its external debts in the first years of the 20th century, in the early years of the 1900s, I think 1902. And Britain sent warships, so-called gunboat diplomacy, to the harbor of Caracas, started shelling Caracas to demand debt service should start again. And so Roosevelt's corollary was partly to stop the gunboat diplomacy by Britain and other European creditor powers, but it didn't just say stop that, it said we'll do the policing. And after the Roosevelt corollary, the U.S. intervened militarily, repeatedly, in the Caribbean and in Central America, landing troops in Cuba or Nicaragua or Haiti or Dominican Republic, where it saw fit under the corollary that Roosevelt introduced. This underwent a change for the better in 1934 when Franklin Roosevelt came into office and said, okay, we're going to stop our own gunboat diplomacy. We're going to stop our intervention of the Marines. We will have a good neighbor policy. And this was because Latin America was seething with all of the U.S. military interventions. After World War II, very importantly, a continental treaty was adopted, the Charter of the Organization of American States in Bogota in 1948. And in that charter, I think it's Article 19, there is a non-intervention clause, very important, that there is collective security in the Americas and no country will intervene militarily or politically in the internal affairs of any other country. How nice and interesting, and how different from what is being asserted now. So this finally brings us to Trump. Actually, even before coming to Trump, just to mention, when the Soviet Union in 1962 installed offensive nuclear weapons in Cuba after the Cuban Revolution and after the United States had attempted to invade Cuba and overthrow Castro at the Bay of Pigs in 1961. The U.S. invoked the Monroe Doctrine then and repeatedly afterwards, that outside powers must not intervene in the Americas, kind of the original meaning of the doctrine. But this brings us to Trump, because Trump is a kind of the Roosevelt corollary on steroids. It's saying not only is the U.S. the policeman, it is the U.S. is the hegemon. it's the boss. Not only will we keep order, not only will we blow up fishing vessels if we say that they're running drugs, not only will we commandeer oil tankers when we feel like it, as the United States has done a couple of days ago, we assert the right to tell the rest of the Americas who you can do business with and who you can't do business with. It's not that other countries can't interfere in the internal affairs. They can't even do economic business. They can't do trade. They can't do investment if the United States deems it so. So the Trump corollary is we're the boss, we're the hegemon, we will do what we want. We will tell other countries, you will make contracts with American companies, sole source. You will not deal with China. You will not deal with outside influence on so-called strategic assets. What are those? What we deem to be strategic assets. We will tell you who will invest in our hemisphere and who will not. And you will accept an American-led order. It's absolutely extraordinary. So all of this is to say, Glenn, sorry for being long-winded, but this is a complete transformation of what James Monroe conveyed to the U.S. Congress in 1823, which was that Europe should stop its colonialism and stop its meddling and stay out, and will do the same vis-a-vis Europe. Now it is a claim of American bullying rights in the Americas, and everyone else stay out. Well, this is something, it's not a corollary. It's a completely different claim, and a quite outrageous one.